ever been as more unfortunate, indirect manifestations of its existence, primarily through the justice and institutional systems, become evident. Traditional methods of researching racism and attitudes towards race have focused on the subjective, explicit reports of participants. However, according to Ledoux, 2002, the body responds automatically and unconsciously to threatening stimuli. Therefore, this study explores a more objective, implicit and unconscious approach to understanding race through the use of stress inducing stimuli, three conditions, race-related, neutral, and noxious, of pictures, IAPS. Auditory stimuli, visualizations, and words, emotional race-related Stroop, and subsequently measuring their effects on mood, reaction time, and accuracy to emotional race-related stimuli, memory, and blood pressure. The emotional race-related Stroop was adapted from the author's master's thesis and remains the only emotional Stroop adaptation for use in assessing the unconscious processing of race-related content in African Americans. 83 participants, 17 males, 66 females, were recruited from undergraduate classes in psychology at Howard University and received academic credit. In exchange for their participation, 78.3% of participants reported being African American. Being a within-subject design, they were all exposed to each condition, race, related, neutral, and noxious, of the IAPS, visualizations, and emotional race-related Stroop. Dependent variables were assessed at 9 time points within each condition, excluding baseline and at the end of the experiment. Separate repeated measures. ANOVAs were conducted through the use of SPSS software. Results indicated significant explicit, conscious, and external effects of stress on mood, memory, and blood. 6. Pressure and implicit, unconscious effects through significant latencies and decreased accuracies on emotional race-related Stroop stimuli. These results make an argument for its relevancy and ultimate inclusion and further development of the emotional race related Stroop for inclusion in the discussion on race. Additionally, whether conscious or unconscious, individuals are significantly impacted by exposure to stressful race-related stimuli as it continues to emerge as a strong indicator and trigger for stress. 7. Table of Contents. Dissertation Committee. 2. Dedication. 3. Acknowledgements. 4. Chapter 1, Introduction. Conceptual issues in the study of psychological stress. Stress is a state of mind, involving both brain and body as well as their interactions. It differs among individuals and reflects not only major events, but also the conflicts and pressures of daily life that alter physiological systems to produce a chronic stress burden that, in turn, is a factor in the extent of disease. McEwen. 12. According to the founder of therapy, M.T. Beck, 1976, we do not respond consistently well to all challenges. We have specific vulnerabilities, fault lines along which stresses accumulate and may set off tremors, eruptions, behavior. Commonly labeled overeating. Given day, human beings are confronted with stressors. Adaptive reactions to stress occur frequently with attention, while maladaptive reactions to stressors attract the attention of parents, teachers, police, the judicial system, and the media. Although the focus of this dissertation research is on the everyday responses to race-related stress, it is important to note that maladaptive responses to stress are common among individuals who are unable to follow the rules of society. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, 2006, 56% of inmates in state prisons have a mental health problem, while 45% of the inmates are in federal prisons and 64% in local jails. Perhaps by understanding the healthy responses to stress, we better understand the maladaptive response to stressful triggers. According to Ledoux, 1996, mental health is maintained by emotional hygiene and mental problems reflect a breakdown of emotional order. According to cognitive behavioral therapy strategies proposed by Beck, 1976, cognitive organization influence emotions are key to understanding behavior. 1. Due to the cognitive and linguistic advances of the human species, we are afforded the privilege of systematically exploring the realm of emotion and cognition, which can shed light on human behavior. According to sociologist Nicholas Rose, it is this curiosity within us that has made us inherently human. The earliest human's internal curiosity and inquiry was evidenced by the first mention of the word brain in the Edwin Smith papyrus thousands of years ago, 2500 BC. Since then, a plethora of physicians, philosophers, and psychologists followed the exploration of cognition and emotion and laid the groundwork on which theories were made and tested. Plato and Aristotle, who provided distinct theories on emotions. The former believed in the dualistic notion that human beings are composed of an ethereal soul which houses our emotions, an earthly body, power, and passions, desires, and emotions make it impossible for us to think. Ledoux, 1998. In other words, Plato proposed that our emotions overpower our cognitive abilities and thereby motivate our actions. If anything, Plato's philosophy shows us how powerful emotions can be if they have the ability to supersede our cognitive abilities/controls. Aristotle, on the other hand, proposed that emotions are or should be influenced by reason and not be controlled by it. Christiansen, 2007. Perhaps both these philosophers understood the powerful role that emotions play in human behavior. Aristotle's functionalist view of the mind provided the foundation for modern-day cognitive science. Powers and Dalgish. The important role that emotions play in the lives of human beings is manifested by the wealth of thoughts, discoveries, and theories that have been devoted to this very topic throughout the years. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, John Locke, 1632. 2. 1704, David Hume, 1711 to 1776, William James, 1842 to 1910, Sigmund Freud, 1856. 1939, Burgess Frederick Skinner, 1904 to 1990. The expansion of our understanding into the relationship between emotions has provided insight into how they influence normal and dysfunctional behavior. Cognitive theories of emotional disorders have provided psychologists with the framework for understanding how dysfunctional behavior arises and how it may be treated. Table 1 summarizes the position of several important theorists who have provided a foundation for modern psychologists to understand emotions and thoughts, many of which credited the role of emotions, mental processes, and the environment in influencing human behavior. central theorists in the study of emotion and thought. Baruch Spinoza stated, because passion can cause maladaptive behavior, it must be harnessed by reason. Behavior and thoughts guided by reason are conducive to survival, but those guided by passion are not. Hergenhan, 2001. Spinoza was credited as one of the greatest pre-Freudian psychologists. His theory is closely related to Freud's. When the term passion is replaced by unconscious determinants of behavior. Hergenhan, 2001. According to Ellis, 1962, a subset of individuals with mental health problems hold irrational beliefs about themselves. Self-beliefs lead to unpleasant emotions and ineffective, maladaptive behavior. Wells and Matthews, 1994. While Beck's, 1967, cognitive theory, underlying dysfunctional schemas are activated in the mind of persons with mental health disorders, and it is this activation that makes them vulnerable to emotional disorders like major depression. Dysfunctional schemas are 3. Formed from distortions in cognition or thinking errors, which include arbitrary inference, selective abstraction, overgeneralization, magnification, and minimization. Personalization and dichotomous thinking. Thinking, Beck et al. 1979. According to Beck, an individual's early life experiences influence the formation of dysfunctional schemas. When a critical event in a person's life occurs, e.g. extreme stressor, the dysfunctional schemas are activated, which leads to negative automatic thoughts. These thoughts are manifested through negative affect and maladaptive cognitions and behaviors. Wells and Matthews, 1994. Skinner, 1974, put very little credit on the role of thoughts or mental events. In fact, he was a radical behaviorist who refused to acknowledge any causal role of mental events in human conduct. For him, so-called mental events are nothing but neurophysiological events to which we have assigned mentalistic labels. Hergenhan, 2001. Neo-behaviorists like Skinner put much on the role of the environment in understanding human behavior. In his book about behaviorism, he later clarified that he did not deny the role of mental processes, but believed that they would be explained as verbal labels that we attach to certain bodily processes. Hergenhan, 2001. Bauer, 1981. Subscribe to the notion that pathological thinking is OT formed from beliefs or schemas, but from the flawed hardwiring of the brain's semantic network, responsible for the processing of external events. In other words, similar to a breathalyzer that has not been calibrated properly, the semantic network output is skewed based on the hardwiring of the brain. In this example, the hardwired system structure is flawed in its processing of the events and needs to be recalibrated or retrained. Regardless of which of these theories on human behavior we apply, we know that several factors play a role in how human beings respond to stressful events. A person, 4, may perceive threats or stressors where there may be none. This is commonly seen in victims of trauma who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Characteristics of PTSD include hypervigilance and avoidance, which are also manifested in individuals who live with chronic stress. Recognizing the debilitating symptoms of trauma, Aaron T. Beck formulated trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy in order to treat individuals who have stress and trauma through psychoeducation, emotional regulation, stress management, and cognitive coping. According to Beck's cognitive behavior model, in order for us to understand behavior, we must understand who we are through our emotions and thoughts. Psychophysiology of stress. One of the leading researchers understanding the biological mechanisms of emotional memory wrote, "Synapses encode who we are," Joseph Ledoux, 2002. Synapses are connections between neurons, which facilitate the flow and storage of information in the brain. Therefore, according to Ledoux, who we are, our mind and behavior is a reflection of the synaptic. These connections are influenced by nature and nurture, and ultimately shape the synaptic connections in the brain. Every event that has occurred in a person's life changes the synaptic connections in their brain and can even lead to changes in brain structure. In 1997, J. Douglas Bremner discovered that the left hippocampus of individuals diagnosed with PTSD and a history of abuse to be 12% smaller than healthy controls, Teicher, 2002. Additionally, Martin Dreesen, 2001, found an 8% reduction in amygdala size in women who were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and had a history of childhood maltreatment. Teicher, 2002. In a study on brain structural plasticity in survivors of a major 5. earthquake, Louis et al., 2013, found that survivors showed significantly lower gray matter volume bilaterally in the insula, hippocampus, caudate and putamen, and bilaterally greater gray matter volume in the orbitofrontal cortex and the parietal lobe. One should know hippocampus and the amygdala are key players in the regulation of emotion and memory. According to Van der Werf, 2013, some studies have reported larger amygdala volume in trauma-exposed non-PTSD subjects when compared to PTSD subjects, Rogers et al., 2009, Mori et al., 2012, while others did not, Gervitz et al., 1996, Vaughn et al., 2001, Lindauer et al., 2004b, Qua et al., 2012. The hippocampus is said to be responsible for the formation and amygdala responsible for the creation of the emotional content of memory, Teicher. 2000s who have been exposed to trauma, especially at an early stage in their development, are at risk for reduced production of small neurons. Even exposure to stress hormones can kill or influence the shape of neurons in the hippocampus. Teicher, 2002. So not only do we know that life events can form dysfunctional schemas, which can lead to dysfunctional emotions, cognitions, and behavior, but we also know that life events, stressors, actually influence the synaptic connections in brain. Brain structure. We can therefore deduce that if the brain structure responsible for emotion and memory are changed after exposure to trauma/stressors, then these functions will be affected at least at the neurochemical and unconscious level of processing. This dissertation explores how we respond to stressful situations and threatening stimuli from a physiological, cognitive, and emotional level. Physiologically, the stress response starts in the brain. When external stress is experienced, the hypothalamus 6 triggers the automatic nervous system, ANS, to release the stress hormones epinephrine and cortisol. The ANS consists of the sympathetic nervous system, SNS, which is responsible for the body's reaction to stress. The SNS triggers the adrenal glands to release adrenaline and cortisol hormones, which in turn prepare the body for the fight or flight response. In the presence of threatening stimuli, the body may activate the fight or flight response system. This is dependent on the encoding of stimuli at the point of learning. For example, does the present black bear activate the fear systems in the body of an individual lost in the woods? For most individuals, the answer is yes. The brain's fear system is influenced by innate and learned threats. Once hardwired, the fear system is pre-programmed to elicit a defensive response. Ledoux, 2002. The brain of the lost individual processes the presence of the black bear and deems it a threat to survival. It is now the amygdala's turn to provide a defensive response to the threatening situation. The response can include changes in blood pressure, heart rate, freezing, no physical movement, dilation of blood vessels in the arms and legs, change in the digestive process, increased glucose levels in the bloodstream, release of hormones, among many other physiological responses. In another scenario, the same can be said of a child who has learned to run and hide when he hears his intoxicated father open the front door at 4 o'clock in the morning. The somatic marker theory of emotions suggests that this child's behavior to be due to marker signals, conscious or unconscious, that arise in bioregulatory processes, Becerra and DiMaggio, 2005. In responding to stimuli, the individual activates somatic markers from previous experiences with the stimuli to a praise reward versus punishment and makes a decision that is least threatening. The child's environment has shaped 7. His perception of threatening stimuli, synaptic connections, which has influenced his emotions, cognitions, and behaviors. His response to hearing the door open at 4 o'clock in the morning will be very different to a child who is looking forward to the arrival of his loving father. This previous case is an example of a conditioned response, CR, to hearing his father enter the home. The child's automatic response is determined by his previous experiences with his father and informs his future responses to his father entering the home. This is important because classical conditioning is a facet of the learning and memory processes forged from environmental conditions. Indeed, environmental learning plays an important role in the automatic processing of stimuli. By extension, the same philosophy can be extended to the involuntary processing of threatening stimuli. For African Americans, the struggles to overcome slavery, emancipation, civil rights, and racism continue to be very potent, expansive, and sensitive to the African American experience. Racial matters have become highly sensitive only to be addressed with care and politically correct dialogue. According to Harrell et al., 2011, racism is part of the fabric of life for African Americans and is among the causes of enduring negative health outcomes. The experience of racism has made African Americans conscious to overt discrimination and covert, structural, cultural, and institutional acts that may be deemed threatening and undermining of the presence or progress of African Americans in the United States of America. Thus, active or unconscious/passive learning and memories of racism are likely acquired by African Americans simply through exposure to the African American experience. Clark et al. Has identified racism as a stressor which leads to negative emotional reactions and physiological changes, while Harrell et al., 2011, outlined the deleterious physiological, 8. unconscious, prenatal, and emotional effects of racism. Therefore, in this dissertation, we propose to further expand on the study and understanding of racism through exploration of conscious and unconscious influences of racially threatening stimuli on the stress response, biological, cognitive, and mood. According to Ledoux, 2002, the body responds automatically and unconsciously to threatening stimuli even before we're actually aware of what is happening. He goes on to explain that the connections from the emotional system to the cognitive systems are strong. The connections from the cognitive system to the emotional system. If we truly want to understand conscious behavior in response to racially threatening stimuli, we need to examine the cognitive unconscious, coined by psychologist John Kihlstrom, which gets to what the mind does outside. Acute and chronic stressors also have damaging and deleterious effects on the cognitive system, as structural and functional changes of brain functioning have been found. Maladaptive affects cognitive behavior through sequential structural modulation of brain networks due to the release in 2012. Also, research has shown that glucocorticoids released into the bloodstream during stress in the hippocampus have been found to be toxic, as it reduces the number of neurons in this region, which has been correlated with the decline in cognitive functions. Sapolsky et al., 2012. Shrinkage of the hippocampus have also been shown in cases of prolonged major depression, Schellein, 2003, PTSD, Gerbitz, 1996, and chronic stress. Gianrose, 2000, on many cognitive systems. Stenford et al., 13, found that job stressors, high quantitative demands, conflicts, etc., were positively associated with cognitive complaints, namely problems with 9. Concentration, memory, decision-making, and thinking. In another study of cognitive functioning of caregivers for palliative patients, McKenzie et al., 2007, found caregivers exhibited significant impairments in attention, including difficulty in self-monitoring, attentional resources. Additionally, know that prolonged stress exposure may trigger maladaptive response to severe manifestations such as learning and memory deficits or anxious and depressive like behavior. Popoli et al., 2011, Souza and Almeida, 2012, Oliveira et al., 2013. Source et al., 2012, also writes about the stress-induced deficits in spatial reference. Working studies of animals and humans indicate that stress-induced activation of the amygdala and its interactions with other brain regions involved in processing memory play a critical role in ensuring that emotionally significant experiences are well remembered. McGough. Stress not only affects the physiological and cognitive systems of the body, it has a significant effect on emotions and behavior. According to Gooseby et al., 2011, family exposure to stress is tied to numerous harmful outcomes for youth and adults, including elevated depressive symptoms and poor health, as well as increased youth behavioral problems. Gutman et al. 2005, Conger et al. 2002, Wickrama et al. 1997, and Blacks are a particularly vulnerable population to high levels of stress. Sternthal et al. 2011. Racism and stress responses in African Americans. It has been well established that racism has a major influence on health, employment, education, and housing opportunities in the United States. Adler et al. 1993. 10. Jackson et al. 1996. Harrell, C.J. 1999. According to Harrell et al. 2003, encounters with racism increase anxiety, worry, and rehearsal of defensive and aggressive actions. Whether acknowledged or not, racism plays a part in the lives of minorities. Thompson, 96, surveyed 2 African Americans and found out 1/3 of them. Participants reported an experience racism within 6 months of being interviewed for their study. Johnson, 1987, provided further evidence that racism not only affects African Americans, but also other minorities. 82% of Hispanic women in their study reported experiences with racial discrimination on their job. Hence, understanding the effects of racism is as valid a question today as it was in the 16th century. African Americans are disproportionately exposed to environmental stimuli that may be sources of chronic and acute stress. Clark et al., 1999, James, 1993, Outlaw, 1993, Sears, 1991, Thompson, 1996. It is widely known that some racially loaded words, phrases, and situations activate physiological and emotional arousal to historically oppressed groups. Just as the child responds to his father opening the front door, racial groups like African Americans respond automatically to racially threatening stimuli by way of emotional, cognitive, and physical arousal. Additionally, with the prevalence of racism in other minority groups, e.g. Hispanics, Amaro et al. 1967, and most recently, wars with nations such as Iraq and Afghanistan, more cultural/religious groups are becoming victims of harassment, violence, and workplace discrimination after the 9/11 attacks in America. Lauderdale, 2006. In the past, the influence of racism on physiological functioning, cardiovascular responsivity, and personality has provided significant contributions to societies. 11. Understanding of how damaging prolonged exposure to racist stimuli can be. Clark et al. 199 showed that perceptions of racism led to negative emotional reactions and physiological arousal, which included the release of cortisol, changes in the immune system, and cardiovascular functioning. Sutherland and Harris, 1986, found the fearful, neutral, and racially noxious scenes valuable in studying the effects of stressful social situations. Their results indicated that fearful and racially noxious scenes demonstrated comparable increases in cortical and heart rate, HR, activity. In 1996, Morris Prather et al. Examined the gender differences in mood and cardiovascular Responses to socially stressful stimuli. They found that BP increased as the stressful scenes were viewed by participants. Women reported more tension, distress, and fear, but men showed higher elevations in blood pressure, BP. Women also responded to the stressful stimuli with higher negative mood ratings than men. Bowen, Reed, and Harrell, 2002, reported reduced HR reactivity with higher levels of perceived racial stress. In another study among African Americans, higher diastolic blood pressure, DBP, and HR were associated with acceptance of mainstream individuality and competitiveness for both men and women. However, men also showed higher systolic blood pressure, SBP, to Euro-American values. Daniels et al., 2001. When most of the literature is concerned with the physiological and emotional responses to societal stressors such as racism, why should we be interested in the cognitive effects of racism? Regazio di Giglio, 1997, states that it is clinically useful for psychological treatment strategies to broaden its scope to include matters that are of social importance to clients such as racism. Accordingly, oppressive forces like racism. 12. Influence cognitive functioning, systemic meaning-making and interaction and individual physiology. According to Salvatore and Shelton, 2007, cognitive impairments may be experienced by those who are victims of ambiguous prejudice. They also go on to say that the degree of cognitive impairment should be influenced by prior experience with prejudice. To get to the heart of how stressful stimuli influence emotions and cognitive performance, we sought out an assessment tool that could provide unconscious, objective responses to threatening stimuli while employing cognitive effort and emotional activation. The emotional Stroop, an adaptation of the Stroop color and word task, was a perfect fit for this endeavor. The traditional version of the Stroop was first introduced to American journals in 1935, Al-Ansari, 2004, and has become one of the most popular neuropsychological instruments used in clinical and research applications. The task word interference effect, also called the Stroop effect, where participants almost twice as long to name of a printed shape. The perceptual conflict and response competition theories have credited this phenomena to limited processing capacity in the presence of competing stimuli and delays in the transformation of perceptual information into verbal, respectively. The modification of the Stroop task, called the emotional Stroop, used as an experimental measure of selective attention to emotional information, Sutton et al., 2007. It has been used in many clinical populations, including those with bipolar I disorder, Lex et al., 2008, eating disorders, Johansson et al., 2008, and smokers, Waters, Andley, 2008, but has never been used with race-related content. It has been found that participants display longer latency in naming the colors of the emotional words, e.g. fat. 13. Stout, chubby, in comparison to color of the neutral words, e.g. cotton, cloth, curtain. This attenuation to emotionally significant stimuli has been dubbed the emotional Stroop effect. For the purpose of our research, we sought out an emotional Stroop task that contained racially relevant stimuli. A comprehensive literature search of the PSYC info database yielded only one result when the keywords racism and Stroop were used together. The study by Blair and Steele, 2009, is the only published article within this database that used the classical Stroop task as a measure of self-control depletion. The authors were interested in whether racial centrality moderated the relationship between interracial encounters and self-control depletion. The results indicated that when racism was involved, racial centrality did in fact moderate the depletion effect. Since this application was not appropriate for this study design, therefore the author designed and tested a version of the emotional Stroop called the Emotional Race-Related Stroop ERRS task. This original design was tested to determine whether the ERRS task could serve as a more objective or unconscious measure of a person's response to racially related stimuli. Through the use of the ERRS, the author sought to examine the influence of such stressful stimuli on the emotional, cognitive, and physiological systems in an attempt to provide a comprehensive picture of the total human response on both a conscious and unconscious level. Preliminary study. The Emotional Race-Related Stroop ERRS task was created in test author's master's thesis project titled The Influence of Stressful Visualizations on 14. Stroop and Emotional Race-Related Stroop tasks. The primary research questions investigated whether stressful visualizations conditions influenced Stroop performance, and whether an ERRS effect could be found within each condition. To design the ERRS, a preliminary study was used to survey a series of race-related words that were deemed emotionally relevant to African Americans. Participants rated the following 50 words on clarity, racial prominence, and blues,